The crash came on a Tuesday at 3:47 p.m. when three men who used to be my boys stood on my porch demanding $10,000 each. I remember the exact time because I'd been watching the clock, waiting for my lawyer to call about the final settlement. Instead, I got Marcus, Jason, and Tyler, my sons, strangers in familiar faces, holding what looked like itemized bills for their childhood. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started, to the moment 6 years ago when I made the choice that would cost me everything I thought mattered. 6 years earlier, I was standing in my brother David's kitchen in Queens, still wearing the black dress from his funeral. The will sat on the counter like a ticking bomb. David had been the golden child, the one who made it big in commercial real estate, the one who always had the answers. And according to this document, he'd left me everything, not our other siblings, not his business partners, me, his little sister who taught 3rd grade and clipped coupons and drove a 12-year-old Honda, the house in the Hamptons, the investment properties scattered across 3 boroughs, the stock portfolio that made my head spin. All mine. The kitchen smelled like the lilies from the funeral, that cloying sweetness that makes you feel like you're breathing in death itself. I remember my hands were shaking as I held the pages, the paper crisp and expensive, the kind of stationery David always used because he believed in maintaining appearances even in legal documents. Patricia Chen, the estate lawyer, stood across from me, her red lipstick perfectly applied even at 9 p.m, her eyes watching me with the careful attention of someone who'd seen this scene play out 100 times before. "Your brother was very specific in his wishes," she'd said, tapping one perfectly manicured nail against a clause on page 3. He knew this would cause conflict. That's why he included this additional letter. The letter was in David's handwriting, the same messy scrawl he'd had since we were kids. I could almost hear his voice as I read it. "Clara, you're the only one who never asked me for anything. The only one who called to check on me without needing something. The only one who remembered my birthday without a reminder notification. This is my thank you for being real when everyone else was playing an angle. Don't let them bully you out of this. You earned it by not trying to earn it." I folded that letter and slipped it into my purse, knowing I'd read it 1,000 more times in the coming months, looking for strength in his words when the attacks came. And they came fast. I know what you're thinking. Lucky break, right? Divine intervention? But here's what they don't tell you about sudden wealth. It doesn't just change your bank account. It changes the way people look at you, the way they breathe when they're around you, the way they calculate in the silence between words. My phone started ringing before I even left David's kitchen. First, my sister Ellen, her voice tight and sweet like artificial sugar. Then my brother Paul, suddenly interested in family dinners after years of radio silence. Then Marcus, my oldest, calling from Seattle, where he'd moved to escape what he called my suffocating expectations. They all wanted to know if I was okay, if I needed help managing everything, if I understood the responsibility I now carried. Ellen called 3 times that first night. The first call was concern wrapped in curiosity. The second was thinly veiled questions about the estate's value. The third, at 11:45 p.m., was a rambling monologue about how David had promised her the Hampton house during a Thanksgiving dinner in 2011. She remembered the exact conversation, she said, the exact words. How he'd told her it would be perfect for her retirement, for hosting family gatherings, for preserving his legacy. "You don't even like the beach," she said, her voice cracking with what might have been genuine tears or might have been practiced emotion. "I've been planning around that house for years. You can't just take it from me." I hadn't taken anything. David had given it. But that distinction didn't matter to Ellen. Just like it wouldn't matter to Paul or to my sons or to any of the other people who would emerge from the woodwork with claims and stories and outraged senses of entitlement. The estate lawyer, Patricia Chen, walked me through the reality. David's will was airtight, But that didn't stop the vultures from circling. Within a week, Ellen had hired her own attorney, claiming David had promised her the Hampton house during a conversation nobody else witnessed. Paul discovered a cocktail napkin from 2009 with what he swore was David's handwriting, promising him a share of the business properties. Even David's ex-business partner materialized with a contract that looked legitimate until Patricia's forensic document examiner proved the signatures were forged. The depositions were brutal. I sat in conference rooms with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look half dead, listening to my siblings reconstruct a version of David I didn't recognize. According to Ellen, he was a generous brother who loved making promises about his assets. According to Paul, he was a savvy businessman who understood the value of oral contracts. According to the ex-partner, he was a man who would never cut his business associates out of his legacy. I sat there, in my discount department store suit, surrounded by lawyers in $1,000 outfits, and I wondered if I'd known my brother at all. But then I'd remember Sunday dinners at his place, just the two of us, where he'd make his terrible spaghetti and we'd watch old movies and talk about nothing important. I'd remember how he'd shown up at my classroom unannounced once, just to take me to lunch because he'd been in the neighborhood. I'd remember the David who existed outside of money and property and business deals, and I'd know the will was right. He'd left everything to me because I was the one who'd loved him without an agenda. I spent the inheritance before I ever saw a dime. Legal fees devoured chunks of it like a hungry beast. Contested wills, depositions, mediation sessions that went nowhere except deeper into my savings to supplement the legal costs. Patricia warned me this could take years. She was right. But she didn't warn me about what it would do to my soul. Watching people I loved transform into strangers who spoke in legalese and calculated their pain in dollar amounts. The mediation sessions were particularly painful. We'd sit around a table, me, Ellen, Paul, their lawyers, my lawyer, and a mediator who probably went home and drank heavily after days like these. And we'd try to find common ground. But how do you find common ground with people who believe you stole their birthright? Ellen would cry, real tears streaming down her face, talking about how betrayed she felt, how David had been like a second father to her after their dad died, how she'd counted on his support in her old age. Paul would get angry, his face red, his voice rising until the mediator had to call for breaks. He'd talk about fairness and family and what David really would have wanted if he'd been thinking clearly. And I'd sit there, silent mostly, because what could I say? That I didn't ask for this? That I'd have been happy with nothing if it meant keeping my family intact? That every dollar of this inheritance felt like blood money, purchased at the cost of relationships I'd thought were real. My son started small. Marcus called one night, his voice careful, asking if I could help with his startup costs. $10,000 to get his app development company off the ground. Jason needed $15,000 for a down payment on a condo. Tyler wanted $20,000 for his music studio equipment. And here's the thing about being a mother. You want to believe in them. You want to be the safety net that catches them when they fall. So I said yes. I pulled from my teaching salary. I took out a small loan against my house. I believed this was temporary, that once David's estate cleared probate, I could replenish everything. That first request from Marcus came on a Wednesday evening. I was grading papers, third graders' attempts at creative writing about their summer vacations, when my phone rang. Marcus's name on the screen made my heart lift in a way it always did when my children called, that Pavlovian response of maternal joy that doesn't fade even when your kids are grown. "Hey, Mom," he said, and his voice had that particular tone, casual but careful, friendly but with an edge of purpose. I should have recognized it, but I was so hungry for connection with him that I ignored the warning bells. We talked about nothing for 10 minutes. His weather in Seattle, my students, the traffic, the kind of small talk that people who used to be close engage in when they're trying to find their way back to intimacy. Then, so smoothly, I almost didn't notice the transition. He mentioned his app idea. "It's revolutionary, Mom. Really." My partner and I have been developing the concept for months. We've got interest from potential investors, but we need seed money to build the prototype. Just $10,000 to get started. Once we have something to show, the real funding will pour in. He sounded so confident, so sure, and I wanted to believe in him. Wanted to be the mother who supported her son's dreams. Wanted to prove that I wasn't the suffocating presence he'd fled to Seattle to escape. "Tell me more about it," I said, and I listened to him paint a picture of success and innovation and financial freedom. He had answers for every question, projections, timelines, names of potential investors who were just waiting to see a working model. "I'll send you the money," I said, and the relief in his voice felt like love. It wasn't, but I couldn't tell the difference anymore. Jason's request came 2 weeks later. A condo, an investment in his future, a chance to build equity instead of throwing money away on rent. It made sense. It sounded responsible. I sent the $15,000. Tyler called crying. His music was so close to taking off. He'd been offered studio time with a producer who'd worked with major artists. But he needed equipment, professional grade stuff that would let him create the quality recordings that would get him noticed. $20,000 felt like a lot, but he was my baby. The one who'd struggled the most, who'd always been searching for his place in the world. I sent the money to all 3 of them, and each time I did, I felt like a good mother. Like I was doing what mothers do, sacrificing for their children's futures. I didn't realize I was teaching them that I was an ATM machine, not a person. That my value was in my ability to solve their problems with cash, not in my presence or wisdom or love. The apartment I'd lived in for 23 years started to feel different. The walls seemed to close in during the nights when I lay awake, calculating how many months until my savings ran dry. The refrigerator's hum became a soundtrack to my anxiety. I'd open my laptop and see my bank balance drop like a stone in water, and each time, I'd tell myself it was an investment in my children's futures. I started taking on extra work. Tutoring after school, summer school sessions, anything to replenish what I was giving away. My principal noticed the exhaustion, the way I'd fallen asleep during a faculty meeting once. She pulled me aside, asked if everything was okay at home. I lied and said I was fine, just busy with the estate situation. The estate situation. That's what I called it, like it was a minor inconvenience rather than a legal battle that was consuming my life. The lawyer's bills came monthly, thick envelopes full of itemized hours that translated to thousands of dollars. Every conference call was $300. Every document review was $200. Every court appearance was $1,500 plus expenses. I was hemorrhaging money from 2 directions, my children's requests and the legal fees, and my teaching salary couldn't keep up. I started using credit cards for groceries. I delayed doctor's appointments because the copays felt too expensive. I wore the same 3 outfits to work on rotation because I couldn't justify buying anything new. Have you ever felt that moment when you realize you've been lying to yourself? When the story you've been telling finally cracks open and the truth spills out like poison? Mine came on a Sunday morning at the corner bodega on Amsterdam Avenue. I was buying coffee and a newspaper when I overheard 2 women talking about a mutual friend whose kids were bleeding her dry. One of them said something that made my blood crystallize in my veins. She keeps giving because she's afraid they'll disappear if she stops, like she's paying rent on their love. I stood there, holding my coffee, feeling the heat of it burn through the paper cup into my palm, and I couldn't move. The bodega owner, Mr. Kim, asked if I was okay. I wasn't. I was a woman who'd spent 6 months convincing herself that financial support was the same as maternal love. A woman who'd ignored every red flag because acknowledging them meant admitting I'd raised children who saw me as an ATM machine with a heartbeat. I walked home in a daze, the coffee forgotten, the newspaper tucked under my arm unread. In my apartment, I pulled out my bank statements and laid them across my kitchen table. 6 months of transactions, highlighted in my own blood. $10,000 to Marcus, $15,000 to Jason, $20,000 to Tyler. then smaller amounts. Marcus needed $5,000 for marketing costs. Jason needed $8,000 for furniture. Tyler needed $12,000 for mixing and mastering. The total made me sick. $73,000 in 6 months. More than my annual salary. More than my savings could sustain. And not once in those 6 months had any of them asked how I was doing. Not once had they asked about the estate battle or the stress or whether I was sleeping at night. Their concern for my well-being was directly proportional to their access to my bank account. The will contest dragged on. Ellen produced more evidence. Paul claimed emotional distress. David's ex-partner filed countersuit after countersuit. And through it all, my boys kept asking. Not demanding, not yet, just asking. Gentle requests that felt like obligations. Marcus's app needed more development funds. Jason's condo deal fell through, and he needed money for a new opportunity. Tyler's studio wasn't generating income yet. Could I float him for a few more months? I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Williams who had an office on the Upper West Side with a view of tired people dragging themselves through life. She had this way of asking questions that felt like surgery without anesthesia. In one session, she asked me to describe my relationship with my sons before David died. I couldn't. I sat there for 10 minutes trying to remember the last real conversation I'd had with any of them that didn't involve money-changing hands. The silence in that office was deafening. "When did you last see them in person?" Dr. Williams asked, her pen poised over her notepad. I had to think about it, really think. Marcus came for Christmas 3 years ago. Jason visited 2 years ago when he was in town for a conference. Tyler, I think it's been 4 years. And phone calls? When they need money. She let that sit there between us, heavy and ugly and undeniable. "Do you know what their daily lives look like?" she continued. "Who their friends are, what they do for fun, what challenges they're facing that don't involve finances?" I didn't. I knew their bank accounts were empty and their opportunities required my funding, but I didn't know if they were happy or sad or fulfilled or lost. I didn't know if Marcus was in a relationship or if Jason liked his job or if Tyler had any friends who weren't fellow musicians. I'd become a funding source, not a mother. They'd become recipients, not sons. The breaking point wasn't dramatic. It was a text message at 11:43 p.m. on a Wednesday. Jason, asking for another $12,000 for what he called a bridge loan until his bonus came through. I stared at those words until they stopped making sense. Bridge to where? Bonus from what job? I realized I didn't know what any of my sons did for a living anymore. I didn't know their friends, their daily lives, their dreams that weren't attached to dollar signs. I typed back one word: no. My phone lit up like Times Square on New Year's Eve. Calls I didn't answer, texts demanding explanations. Marcus, the oldest, the one who was supposed to be the leader, sent me a paragraph about how I was abandoning them in their time of need, how David would be disappointed in my selfishness, how family was supposed to support each other. That last line made something inside me snap clean in half. The invocation of David's name was what did it. David, who'd worked for everything he had, who'd built his business from nothing, who'd told me once that the worst thing you could do for your kids was make life too easy for them. Marcus using David as a weapon against me felt like a desecration of my brother's memory. I called Marcus back, something I never did when they were demanding money. He answered on the first ring, probably expecting capitulation. "Don't you ever use your uncle's name to manipulate me?" I said, my voice cold in a way I didn't recognize. David worked for his success. He didn't beg family members for handouts based on fictional emergencies. "Fictional?" Marcus's voice rose. "Mom, these are real needs, real opportunities if you just—" "Where is your app, Marcus? The one you needed $10,000 to develop. Show me the prototype. Show me the business registration. Show me anything that proves you did what you said you'd do with my money." Silence. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then, "It's in development. These things take time." "It's been 6 months. You said you'd have something to show investors in 3 months." More silence. "I want documentation," I continued, "for all of you. Bank statements showing where the money went, business registrations, contracts, receipts. Something that proves any of you told me the truth about anything." "You don't trust us?" Jason's voice came through. Marcus had put me on speaker. "I don't trust anyone anymore," I said, and I hung up. I met Sally Rodriguez for coffee the next morning. Sally and I had been roommates at Columbia back when we thought we could change the world with teaching degrees and good intentions. She'd heard through mutual friends about my legal battles, and she showed up at my door with bagels and the kind of direct honesty that only comes from people who knew you before life got complicated. "You know what you're doing, right?" Sally said, not looking up from her coffee. "You're teaching them that you're a resource, not a person. Every dollar you give, you're telling them that's what you're worth. They're my sons. They're grown men who haven't asked how you're doing in 6 months." She finally looked at me, her dark eyes sharp. "When's the last time any of them asked about the case? About how you're handling the stress? About whether you're eating or sleeping or just surviving?" I couldn't answer because the truth was never. Not once in 6 months had any of my sons asked about me beyond whether the estate had settled yet. Their concern for my well-being was directly proportional to their access to my bank account. Sally pulled out her phone and showed me an article about financial abuse in families. The warning signs read like a checklist of my life: escalating requests, emotional manipulation, guilt tripping, isolation from other relationships, gaslighting when questioned, treating the victim as an obligation rather than a person. "This is abuse, Clara," she said. "Just because it's your kids doesn't make it any less real." The word abuse hit me like cold water. I'd never thought of it that way. Abuse was what happened in other families, to other people. Abuse was violence and cruelty and malice. It wasn't your children asking for help, was it? But as I read that article, sitting in the coffee shop while morning commuters rushed past the windows, I recognized myself in every paragraph. The victim who makes excuses, who believes the next time will be different, who thinks love can solve what's fundamentally broken, who measures their worth by their usefulness. The photograph that finally broke me was tucked in an old album I found while cleaning out a closet. Me at 32, holding baby Marcus, my face bright with that stupid hope that every new mother has. The woman in that picture believed in fairy tales. She thought love was unconditional. She didn't know that someday her children would show up with calculators where their hearts should be. I made an appointment with my bank, not to deposit or withdraw, but to restructure. I set up barriers, restrictions, automatic denials for anyone trying to access my accounts who wasn't me. The banker, a young woman who probably thought I was paranoid, processed everything with professional courtesy. She didn't understand that financial abuse doesn't always look like stolen credit cards and forged checks. Sometimes it looks like family members who've learned that guilt is more effective than gratitude. Patricia Chen called with news about the estate. We'd won. Not everything, but enough. Ellen and Paul's claims were dismissed. The ex-partner's lawsuit was thrown out. After 3 years of legal warfare, David's estate would finally be settled and distributed according to his actual wishes. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides and left nothing but the shell. The settlement was significant, even after the legal fees. Enough to pay off my house, establish a solid retirement, and have breathing room I'd never known. Patricia explained the distribution, the tax implications, the timeline for receiving funds. I signed papers in her office, her red lipstick still perfect even after 3 years of legal battle. And I felt nothing. "You should celebrate," Patricia said, pouring 2 glasses of champagne she'd brought for the occasion. This was a hard-fought victory. "I'm too tired to celebrate," I told her. And I was. Tired of fighting. tired of defending my right to what my brother had chosen to give me, tired of being seen as the villain in everyone else's story. The boys found out through their own channels. I didn't call them. I didn't send a group text or an email announcement. I just waited, knowing that money has a way of traveling faster than good news. Marcus called first, his voice warm with what sounded like genuine happiness. "Congratulations, Mom. You must be so relieved." Then, casually, almost as an afterthought, "This means you can help me with that expansion funding we talked about, right?" We never talked about expansion funding, but in Marcus's mind, my victory was his windfall. Jason and Tyler followed with similar calls, similar casual mentions of opportunities that required my immediate financial intervention. It was like watching a script play out, each of them hitting their marks, delivering their lines, expecting the same ending where Mom opens her wallet and makes everything okay. I didn't say no right away. I said something worse. I said, "Let me think about it." Because here's the truth about being in an abusive relationship with your own children. You still love them. You still remember teaching them to tie their shoes and helping them with homework and believing they would grow into good men. You still want to believe that somewhere inside these strangers is the children you raised. Dr. Williams asked me to make a list. On one side, write down everything my sons had given me in the past 3 years. On the other, everything I'd given them. I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, and I couldn't fill the first column. Not one entry, no birthday calls, no random check-ins, no asking about my health or my job or my life. The second column ran onto a second page. Money, yes, but also time, energy, the benefit of every doubt, the suspension of disbelief when their stories didn't quite add up. That's when Sally suggested I do something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. She told me about a friend who dealt with financial exploitation from adult children. The friend had hired a forensic accountant to track where the money actually went. Most people in my situation, Sally said, discover their money didn't go where they were told it went. The accountant's name was Robert Chen, no relation to my lawyer Patricia, and he had the personality of a tax form and the ethics of a priest. He charged a flat fee for his investigation, which seemed ironic, paying money to find out where my money went. But I signed the contract, gave him access to my records, and waited. Robert's office was in a bland building in Midtown, the kind of place where every door looks the same, and the elevator music makes you want to confess to crimes you didn't commit. His office was exactly what you'd expect from a forensic accountant. Filing cabinets, computer monitors displaying spreadsheets, motivational posters about integrity that he probably didn't even see anymore. He asked me questions in a methodical way, taking notes in a leather-bound notebook. Every transaction I could remember, every story my sons had told me, every promise they'd made about repayment or returns on investment. His face remained neutral, giving nothing away, which was somehow more terrifying than judgment would have been. "How long will this take?" I asked. 2 to 3 weeks, depending on what I find. Some trails are easy to follow, others require more digging. He looked at me over his reading glasses. "Mrs. Morrison, I need to prepare you for what this might reveal. In my experience, when parents ask me to investigate their children, what we find is rarely what they hoped." "I'm not hoping for anything specific," I said. "I just need to know the truth." He nodded, like he'd heard that before, and knew it was both true and false. 3 weeks later, Robert sat across from me in his office that smelled like old files and broken dreams, and he showed me what my maternal love had actually purchased. Marcus's startup? Never registered with the state. No business license, no incorporation papers, nothing. The $15,000 Jason needed for a condo down payment? He'd been renting the same apartment for 2 years. Tyler's music studio equipment? Well, Tyler had posted Instagram photos from Las Vegas the same week I'd sent that money. Blackjack tables and bottle service don't cost $20,000, but apparently they come close. But Robert had found more than just lies. He'd found a pattern of coordination. Text messages between my sons discussing how to approach me, when to ask, how much to request. Group chats where they strategized about keeping their stories straight. Discussions about the estate settlement and how to maximize their take once I received the inheritance. They planned this, I said, staring at the printed screenshots. They actually coordinated their manipulation. It appears so, Robert said quietly. I'm sorry. I sat there looking at Robert's neat spreadsheet of my destruction, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not sadness, not even anger. Just clarity, cold and sharp, and absolutely certain. These men who shared my DNA had systematically lied to me, manipulated me, and extracted nearly $73,000 over 3 years based on pure fiction. What do people usually do? I asked Robert. When they find out? Most cut off contact immediately. Some file police reports for fraud. Some try to get their money back through civil court. He paused, studying me. But you're asking the wrong question. The question isn't what other people do. It's what you need to do to protect yourself going forward. I spent a week in what felt like suspended animation. I went to work. I taught my third graders about multiplication tables and the water cycle. I graded papers and attended faculty meetings and pretended that my entire understanding of motherhood hadn't just been demolished. At night, I'd sit at my kitchen table with Robert's report, reading it like a horror novel where I was both the victim and the fool. One text exchange particularly haunted me. Marcus to Jason. Mom's getting soft. Keep asking. She'll keep giving. It's like a slot machine. Eventually, it pays out. Jason's response. She feels guilty about Uncle David's money. We can use that. Tyler. Thinks she'll go for another $10K if I say it's for therapy. They'd laughed about me, strategized about me, treated my love like a weakness to exploit. The plan came to me on a Friday night while I was watching the city lights from my window. If my sons wanted to treat me like a business transaction, then I'd handle this like business. No tears, no emotional appeals, just cold, hard reality delivered with the same casual disregard they'd shown me. I compiled everything. Bank statements, Robert's forensic report, screenshots of Instagram posts that contradicted their stories, incorporation searches that showed no business entities, rental agreements that proved Jason's lies. I put it all in 3 identical folders, one for each son. Then I waited. The estate settlement came through on a Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, my phone was ringing off the hook. I didn't answer. I knew what they wanted, and I knew they'd eventually come to me. Desperation has a way of making people show up in person. They arrived on Thursday, all 3 of them together, which should have been my first clue. This was coordinated. Marcus rang the doorbell at 3:47 p.m. I know because I was watching the clock, the way you do when you're waiting for something inevitable and terrible. I let them in, offered them coffee they didn't want, watched them sit on my second-hand couch with the posture of men who thought they were about to collect a debt. And that's when Marcus pulled out a piece of paper that made my vision blur at the edges. It was an invoice, an actual invoice, itemized and formatted like something from a professional service. 3 columns, one for each of them, listing grievances and assigning dollar values. Emotional neglect during childhood, $5,000. Missed opportunities due to lack of support, $10,000. Therapy costs for dealing with a difficult mother, $3,000. The numbers went on. Creative and cruel and absolutely insane. The document was printed on nice paper with a header that read, Statement of Damages, like this was a legitimate legal claim. Each line item had dates, descriptions, and calculated emotional pain converted to currency. There were subcategories: failure to attend school functions when this was demonstrably false, valued at $2,000. Insufficient praise and encouragement at $1,500. creating a home environment that felt cold and unwelcoming at 3,000. I stared at this fantasy document, this revision of history so extreme it bordered on parody, and I wondered if they actually believed it or if they just thought I was stupid enough to fall for it. "We've been patient," Marcus said, his voice steady like he'd practiced this speech. "We've given you time to settle the estate, but now it's time to acknowledge the damage you did and compensate us accordingly. 10,000 each. That's more than fair, considering what we've been through." I looked at Jason, who couldn't meet my eyes, at Tyler, who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, at Marcus, who stared at me with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no and meant it. "What you've been through," I repeated slowly. "Tell me, what exactly have you been through?" "You know what?" Jason jumped in. "Growing up with a mother who was always working, who put her career first, who made us feel like we were never enough." The lies were so confident they almost sounded true. "I taught 3rd grade. I was home every day by 4. I went to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game. I had the photographs to prove it, though I suspected photographs wouldn't matter to men who'd invented their own history." "I have something for each of you," I said, standing up. They perked up like dogs hearing a dinner bell. I walked to my bedroom and retrieved the 3 folders, my hands steady in a way that surprised me. When I came back, I placed 1 folder in front of each son. "What's this?" Tyler asked. "Open it." The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I watched their faces as they processed Robert's findings, watched the color drain from Marcus's cheeks, watched Jason's hands start to shake, watched Tyler close his folder and push it away like it might bite him. Marcus flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening with each one. The incorporation searches, the bank statements, the text messages, especially the text messages. I watched him realize that I knew, not suspected, but knew with documentation and evidence and the kind of certainty that can't be argued away. Jason had stopped looking at the folder entirely. His eyes were fixed on his hands, which were trembling in his lap. The rental agreement for his apartment, proving he'd never needed a condo down payment, sat on top of his pile like an accusation. Tyler was crying before he even finished reading the first page. Silent tears that I might have found touching if I still had any sympathy left for them. "This is," Marcus started. "The truth," I finished. "Every lie you told me, every dollar you stole, every manipulation documented with dates and evidence. I have copies of everything, including the incorporation searches showing your business doesn't exist, Jason's rental agreement proving he never needed that down payment, and Tyler's social media posts from Vegas." "You had us investigated?" Jason's voice cracked. "I protected myself. Something I should have done 3 years ago." I sat back down, feeling calmer than I had in months. "You want to talk about what you've been through? Let's talk about what I've been through. A will contest that cost me nearly every penny of my own savings. 3 years of legal battles while teaching full-time to support myself. And through all of it, my sons, my own children, saw me as nothing but an ATM machine they could drain dry with fairy tales and fake emergencies. The thing about truth is, it sits heavy in a room. You can't talk over it or around it. You have to sit in it and feel the weight of what you've done. I watched my sons sit in that weight, and none of them could lift their heads. "We needed the money," Marcus finally said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "You wanted the money," I corrected. "There's a difference. And you wanted it badly enough to lie to someone who would have helped you for free if you'd just been honest. Do you know what hurts the most? Not the money. I can survive without money. It's that you looked me in the eye, month after month, and spun stories you knew were false. You treated me like a mark in a con game." "We're your sons," Marcus said, his voice rising. "You're supposed to help us." "Help you with what, Marcus? Your imaginary business, Jason's fictional condo, Tyler's Vegas trip disguised as studio equipment? I leaned forward. You know what else is in those folders? Your text messages to each other, planning how to manipulate me, laughing about how easy I was, strategizing about the estate settlement like it was money you'd earned instead of money my brother left to me. The color that had drained from their faces now came back in blotches of red shame. Or maybe anger. With them, it was hard to tell the difference anymore. Tyler started crying. Actual tears running down his face like a child who'd been caught stealing cookies. But these weren't cookies. This was my dignity, my trust, my belief that family meant something beyond transactions. What do you want from us? Jason asked quietly. The question hung there, and I realized I'd been asking myself the same thing for weeks. What did I want? An apology? Repayment? Some guarantee they'd never do this again? None of those things would erase the past 3 years or restore what I'd lost. I want you to leave, I said. I want you to take your itemized lists of imaginary grievances and your fake invoices and your practiced speeches, and I want you to leave my home. You are not welcome here anymore. You're our mother, Marcus said, standing up like he was going to fight this. No, I was your mother. I was the woman who sacrificed everything to raise you right, who believed in you when nobody else did, who loved you unconditionally. But you turned me into a resource to be exploited. You did that, not me. And I don't have a relationship with people who see me as a bank account. You can't just cut us off, Marcus said. And there it was, the real fear. Not the loss of relationship, but the loss of access. I can, and I am. You have exactly 5 minutes to leave my apartment before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Mom, please, Tyler said through his tears. We made mistakes, but we're still your sons. We still love you. No, Tyler. You love what I could give you. There's a difference, and it's one you should have learned a long time ago. They left, eventually. Marcus tried to argue. Jason tried to apologize in that hollow way that people do when they're sorry they got caught, not sorry for what they did. Tyler just cried and stumbled out behind his brothers. I closed the door behind them and stood in the silence of my apartment, waiting to feel something. Grief, maybe. Regret. Instead, I felt light. Like I'd been carrying their weight for so long, I'd forgotten what it was like to stand upright. The next morning, I changed my locks. Not because I thought they'd come back, but because I needed the symbolic gesture. New locks, new boundaries, new life. I called Patricia Chen and told her to update my will. Everything I had would go to charity when I died. Educational foundations for underprivileged kids, music programs for schools that couldn't afford them. My sons would get nothing, not out of spite, but because they'd already taken enough. Patricia didn't judge or question. She just took notes in her efficient way and said she'd have new documents drafted by the end of the week. You're sure about this? She asked, not to dissuade me, but to confirm. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Sally came over that weekend with wine and Chinese food, and the understanding that sometimes you need to grieve people who are still alive. We sat on my couch, the same one where my sons had presented their invoices, and she let me talk. About the guilt that still gnawed at me, about wondering if I'd failed them somehow, about the tiny, stupid part of me that still hoped they'd come back changed. You didn't fail them, Sally said. You gave them every tool they needed to be decent humans. They chose to use those tools to build bridges to your wallet instead of to your heart. That's on them. We drank wine and ate kung pao chicken and watched bad reality TV. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could breathe. The weight of constant vigilance, of wondering when the next request would come, of managing their emotions along with my own. It was gone. In its place was something that felt like peace, fragile and new, but real. The lawsuit came 2 weeks later. Marcus, as the ringleader, decided to try legal channels. He sued me for emotional damages and promised financial support. Patricia took one look at the filing and laughed, actually laughed, which I'd never heard her do before. "He has no case," she said. "Not even a weak one. This is pure desperation. He'll withdraw it when he realizes how expensive it is to pursue frivolous litigation." She was right. The suit was dismissed within a month. But the message was clear. My sons weren't sorry. They were angry. Angry that I'd discovered their lies. Angry that I'd cut off their access. Angry that the woman they'd been manipulating for 3 years had finally grown a spine. Marcus tried one more approach about 6 weeks after the confrontation. He sent a letter, handwritten, 8 pages of what he probably thought was heartfelt confession. He admitted the lies. He admitted the manipulation. He said he'd been desperate, that his life had fallen apart, that he'd made terrible choices. And then, at the end of page 7, he asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss moving forward. I read that letter 3 times, looking for genuine remorse. What I found instead was another transaction. He'd give me the apology I wanted if I'd give him the forgiveness he needed. It was the same pattern, just wrapped in more sophisticated paper. I didn't respond. Silence, I discovered, was the most powerful answer I could give. It said everything I needed to say without giving him an opening to negotiate. Life continued. The estate settlement meant I could finally breathe financially. I didn't become wealthy. The legal fees had eaten too much for that. But I was stable, secure. I paid off my house. I set up a retirement account that couldn't be touched. I donated a portion to the school where I taught, funding a library expansion that would benefit students for years. The school held a dedication ceremony. Principal Morrison gave a speech about generosity and community. I stood there, listening to her talk about making a difference in children's lives, and I realized something important. I had made a difference in my sons' lives. I'd taught them to read and write. I'd taught them to tie their shoes and ride bikes and treat others with respect. The fact that they'd unlearned those lessons wasn't my failure. It was theirs. The library dedication had a plaque, the David Morrison Memorial Library, donated by his sister Clara in honor of education and opportunity. David would have liked that, I thought. He'd always believed in investing in education, in giving kids chances he'd had to fight for. A small girl, maybe 8 years old, came up to me after the ceremony. "Are you the lady who gave us all these books?" she asked. "I helped," I said. "Thank you. I love reading, but we don't have many books at home." I watched her run back to the shelves, her fingers trailing across the spines of new books with that reverence that only children have, and I felt something shift inside me. This was what David's money was meant for. Not enabling my son's lies, not funding fake businesses and imaginary condos, but giving chances to kids who needed them. I started volunteering at a women's shelter on Saturday mornings. The shelter served women escaping all kinds of abuse, physical, emotional, financial. I led a support group for mothers dealing with adult children who exploited them. The first meeting, I was shocked by how many women showed up. 15 mothers, ranging from their 50s to their 80s, all with similar stories. Children who saw them as resources. Children who lied and manipulated and demanded and disappeared when the money ran out. One woman, Maria, was 73 and had given her son over $200,000 for a business that never existed. Another, Jennifer, had refinanced her house 3 times to support a daughter's emergencies. They cried as they told their stories, and I recognized myself in every word. The shame of admitting you'd been fooled. The guilt of wondering if you should give one more chance. The grief of loving someone who didn't love you back the same way. "You know what the hardest part is?" Maria said one morning. "Everyone tells you to just cut them off, like it's that simple. Like you can just turn off 30, 40, 50 years of love because they hurt you. But it doesn't work that way. I still love my son. I just can't be in his life anymore. That was it exactly. The love didn't disappear just because the relationship ended. It sat there inside you, stubborn and painful, reminding you of who they used to be or who you thought they were. The grief wasn't just for the loss of the relationship. It was for the loss of the illusion. The support group met in a room with bad coffee and fluorescent lighting and folding chairs that squeaked when you shifted your weight. But those women understood things my oldest friends couldn't. They understood the particular shame of being exploited by your own children. They understood the isolation of not being able to talk about it, because who wants to admit they raised people who turned out like this? We shared strategies for protecting ourselves, how to set up bank accounts that couldn't be accessed by family members, how to create wills that couldn't be contested, how to recognize the warning signs of financial manipulation before you're in too deep, how to grieve relationships with living people, how to forgive yourself for being human enough to want to believe in your children. Jennifer brought in a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse to speak to the group. The lawyer, a woman named Diane Martinez, explained that financial exploitation by adult children was one of the fastest-growing forms of abuse and one of the least reported. She talked about legal protections, about how to document abuse, about when law enforcement could help and when it couldn't. The hardest cases are the ones like yours, Diane said, looking around the room. When there's no physical violence, no forged signatures, just manipulation and lies. The law doesn't protect you from your own willingness to believe people you love. You have to protect yourselves. Through the support group, I learned something valuable. Financial abuse by adult children is one of the most underreported forms of exploitation because the victims feel too ashamed to admit it happened. We're supposed to be the wise ones, the ones who should know better. Admitting that our own children scammed us feels like admitting we failed at the most basic human task, raising good kids. But here's what I've learned. You can do everything right and still end up with children who choose wrong. You can model integrity and teach values and provide love and support. And your children can still grow up to be people who see you as a transaction. That's not your failure. That's their choice, and you can't take responsibility for the choices other people make, even if those people came from your body. I became the group's unofficial leader, not because I had all the answers, but because I was willing to share my story in its ugliest details. I told them about the invoices my sons had presented, about the text messages where they'd laughed about manipulating me, about standing in that bodega and hearing a stranger describe my life with perfect accuracy. "Does it get better?" a new woman asked one Saturday. Her name was Linda, and her daughter had stolen her identity to take out credit cards. "Does the pain go away?" "It gets different," I said. "Not better, necessarily, but different. You learn to carry it. You learn to build a life around the hole they left. You learn that you're more than what they made you feel like." A year after the confrontation, I saw Jason at a grocery store in Brooklyn. He was with a woman I didn't recognize, laughing at something she said. He looked happy, healthy, like a man who wasn't crushed by the weight of being cut off from his mother's money. He saw me at the same moment I saw him. Our eyes met across the produce section, and I watched him make a choice. He turned away, steering the woman down a different aisle. I stood there holding a bag of apples, feeling the weight of what that moment meant. He chose comfort over confrontation. He chose to pretend I didn't exist rather than face what he'd done. And strangely, I felt relieved, because his avoidance confirmed what I already knew. He wasn't sorry. He was just caught. I finished my shopping and went home, and I didn't cry about it until later that night, alone in my apartment with the city lights blinking outside my window. I cried for the little boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street, for the teenager who'd been so proud when he got his first job, for the young man I'd believed he would become. I cried for the relationship we'd never have and the grandson I'd probably never meet if that woman in the grocery store ever became his wife. But I didn't call him. I didn't reach out. I let him make his choice, and I made mine, which was to keep moving forward. The support group expanded. We started meeting twice a month. I brought in lawyers to talk about protecting assets from exploitation, financial advisors who specialized in elder abuse prevention, therapists who helped us process the complex grief of losing children who were still alive. We created a resource guide for other mothers, a handbook for recognizing manipulation and setting boundaries. My story became part of that handbook. Not the whole story. I kept the most painful parts private, but enough to help other women see the patterns. The gradual escalation of requests, the emotional manipulation wrapped in family obligation, the way exploiters isolate you from other relationships so you have no reality check, the gaslighting when you question their stories. It was all textbook, and yet each of us had fallen for it because we wanted to believe our children loved us more than they loved our money. We distributed the handbook through social services, senior centers, community organizations. Women started calling, asking if they could join the group. We had to split into 2 sessions to accommodate everyone. The shelter director told me we were filling a need nobody else was addressing. Dr. Williams and I still met monthly. Not because I was broken, but because healing isn't a destination. It's a practice, like yoga or meditation. Some days I felt strong and certain. Other days I'd see something that reminded me of my boys when they were little. A father teaching his son to throw a baseball, a mother helping her daughter with homework, and the grief would hit me fresh and sharp. "Do you think you'll ever reconcile?" Dr. Williams asked during one session. "I don't know. Part of me wants to believe they'll change, that they'll wake up one day and realize what they lost. But I can't build my life around that hope. I have to move forward as if this is permanent, because it might be. And if they do change? If they come back genuinely sorry?" I thought about that for a long time. "Then we'll see. But they'd have to prove it through actions, not words. No more promises or explanations or requests. Just consistent, genuine change over years, not weeks. And even then, the relationship would never be what it was. You can't unknow what I know about them now." Dr. Williams nodded, making a note in her leather portfolio. "That's growth, Clara. A year ago, you would have said you'd take them back if they just apologized. Now you understand that real change requires real work, and even then, some things can't be repaired, only rebuilt differently." She was right. I'd changed more than I realized. The woman who'd stood in that bodega a year ago, frozen with the realization of her own exploitation, she was gone. In her place was someone harder, but also freer. Someone who understood that love without boundaries wasn't love at all, just enabling dressed up in maternal clothing. The second year after the confrontation, I took a trip to Seattle. Not to see Marcus, I didn't tell him I was coming, but to visit a friend from college who'd moved there decades ago. We spent a week hiking and drinking wine and talking about life. On my last day, I drove past the neighborhood where Marcus lived. I didn't stop, didn't slow down, just acknowledged that he existed somewhere in that city, living a life I knew nothing about. It felt like closure, or as close to closure as you can get when the story doesn't have an ending. My sons were out there, somewhere, making their choices. And I was here, making mine. The difference was that my choices were finally about me, not about maintaining a relationship that only existed in my imagination. I learned through mutual acquaintances that all 3 of my sons were doing fine. Marcus's app development company that never existed apparently existed now, funded by investors who did their due diligence better than I had. Jason bought a condo, using his own money and his own credit. Tyler was still pursuing music, still struggling, but making it work without my checks keeping him afloat. They didn't need me. They never really needed me. They just needed my wallet, and when that closed, they found other sources. The knowledge should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it felt validating. They were capable all along. They just chose the easy path of exploiting me rather than the hard path of earning it themselves. That was on them, not me. My teaching contract came up for renewal. I was 61, eligible for early retirement if I wanted it. Part of me was tempted to keep working. Teaching had been my identity for so long. But another part of me recognized that I'd spent my whole life taking care of other people's children while my own grew into strangers. Maybe it was time to take care of myself. I retired at the end of the school year. The faculty threw me a party. My students made me cards and gave me hugs and promised to visit. Principal Morrison gave a speech about dedication and impact. And I cried because the validation felt real in a way that my son's love never had. These children appreciated me. These parents thanked me. This community valued what I'd given. Retirement looked different than I'd imagined. I volunteered more at the shelter. I took art classes at the community center. I traveled, small trips at first, then bigger ones. I went to Greece and stood on ancient stones and felt small in the best way. I went to Ireland and heard music that made my chest ache. I went to Japan and learned that silence can be a gift. In Kyoto, I visited a temple where people wrote prayers on wooden tablets and hung them for the gods to see. I stood there with my own tablet, pen in hand, trying to decide what to write. A prayer for my sons to change, for forgiveness, for peace. In the end, I wrote, "Grant me the wisdom to know my worth beyond what I can give others." I hung the tablet next to hundreds of others, all those human hopes and fears and desires swaying in the breeze, and I felt part of something larger than my own pain. We were all here, all these people from all over the world, trying to figure out how to be human, how to love without losing ourselves, how to hope without being destroyed by disappointment. Each trip, I sent postcards to the support group, reminding them that life existed beyond the pain of their children's betrayal, that we could rebuild ourselves into something new. That survival wasn't just about getting through the day, it was about finding joy on the other side of grief. In Greece, I walked through the ruins of the Acropolis at sunrise, before the tourist crowds arrived. The stones beneath my feet had witnessed thousands of years of human drama. Empires rising and falling, families forming and fracturing, love given and betrayed. My small tragedy felt both insignificant and universal in that ancient place. A guide told me that the Greeks believed in catharsis, that watching tragedy performed could purge you of negative emotions. I'd been living my own Greek tragedy, and maybe now, finally, I was finding my catharsis. In Ireland, I stayed in a small cottage in County Clare and spent my days walking the cliffs of Moher. The wind there was fierce, constant, the kind that strips away everything superficial and leaves you with only what's essential. I met an elderly woman named Siobhan who ran the local pub. Over whiskey and stories, she told me about her own son, who'd emigrated to America 30 years ago and never called. "Do you still love him?" I asked. "Every day," she said, her eyes distant. "But I learned to love him from afar, to wish him well without needing him to be what he's not. It's a different kind of love, but it's still real." That conversation stayed with me. Love from afar. Love that asked for nothing. Love that existed independent of reciprocation or recognition. It was a concept I was still learning. In Japan, beyond the temple in Kyoto, I experienced a tea ceremony led by a woman who moved with such deliberate grace that every gesture seemed like meditation. She explained that the ceremony was about being fully present in each moment, about creating beauty in simple actions, about finding peace in ritual. "We cannot control what others do," she said in careful English. "We can only control how we meet each moment, with anger or with grace, with resentment or with acceptance." I thought about my sons as I held the tea bowl, feeling its warmth in my palms. I thought about the choice I faced every morning, to wake up bitter about what they'd done, or to wake up grateful for what I'd learned. Most days I chose gratitude. Some days I didn't. But I was learning that healing wasn't linear, and peace wasn't permanent. It was something you had to choose, again and again, like breathing. Maria collected my postcards, she told me later. She had them pinned to a bulletin board in her kitchen, little reminders that there was still a world out there worth exploring. That being cut off from your children didn't mean being cut off from life. "Your postcards saved me on my worst days," she confessed during one group meeting. When I wanted to call my son, to give him one more chance, I'd look at your postcards and remember there's a whole world out there that doesn't revolve around our pain. The group had become family in a way my actual family never was. These women knew the worst parts of my story and loved me anyway. They didn't want anything from me except honesty and presence. In their company, I learned what unconditional support actually looked like. On the 3-year anniversary of the confrontation, I received a letter from Tyler. Not Marcus the ringleader or Jason the middle child, but Tyler, the baby, the one who'd cried when I told them to leave. The envelope was thick, and I almost threw it away without opening it. But curiosity won. Inside was a check for $20,000 and a letter that was clearly drafted and redrafted many times based on the perfect handwriting and careful word choice. Tyler didn't make excuses. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just laid out in painful detail the therapy he'd been doing, the work he'd done to understand why he'd treated me like an ATM, the amends he was making, not to get me back, but because it was the right thing to do. The check, he explained, was what he owed me plus interest. He didn't expect me to accept it. He didn't expect me to respond. He just wanted me to know that he understood what he'd done was wrong, that he was sorry, that he was trying to be better. The letter was 10 pages, handwritten in the careful script that Tyler had always had, even as a child. He detailed the therapy sessions, the realizations about how he'd learned to manipulate me, the moment he understood that asking for money had become easier than being honest. He wrote about the shame he felt when he looked at Robert's report, seeing his lies documented so clinically. "I told myself I needed the money for my music," he wrote. "But the truth is, I spent most of it trying to avoid growing up, trying to avoid the hard work of actually building a career instead of playing at one. You would have helped me if I'd been honest. You would have supported me in real ways, not just financial ones. But I chose the easy lie over the hard truth, and I lost you because of it." He wrote about seeing me in his therapist's office, not literally, but in the patterns they discussed. The mother he'd taken for granted, the woman he'd reduced to a transaction, the relationship he'd destroyed through laziness and entitlement. "I don't expect you to forgive me," the letter concluded. "I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that I see what I did. I see who I was, and I'm working every day to be someone different, someone you might have been proud of if I hadn't ruined everything." I sat with that letter for a week, reading it multiple times, looking for manipulation or hidden agendas. What I found instead was genuine remorse, not the transactional kind that's sorry for getting caught, but the kind that comes from real self-reflection and growth. I cashed the check and donated it to the women's shelter. Then I wrote Tyler back, a short letter thanking him for the apology and acknowledging the work he'd done. I told him I forgave him, because holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting him to die. But I also told him that forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation, that I needed more time, more evidence of change, more proof that this wasn't another manipulation. His response came quickly. He understood. He didn't expect anything. He just wanted me to know he was working on himself, and he hoped that someday, maybe, we could find a way back to some version of a relationship. Not the old relationship, because that was built on lies and exploitation, but something new, something honest. 3 months later, Tyler sent another letter. No check this time, just an update. He'd gotten a regular job, something stable that paid the bills while he pursued music on the side. He was living within his means. He'd joined a 12-step program for people who struggled with manipulation and dishonesty in relationships. He was learning, he said, that the pattern he'd developed with me existed in all his relationships, with friends, with romantic partners, with employers. He'd spent his whole adult life trying to get what he needed through manipulation instead of earning it through honesty and effort. "I'm starting to understand why you cut us off," he wrote. "Not just intellectually, but in my gut. You were saving yourself, but you were also refusing to enable the worst parts of who I was. If you'd kept giving, I'd never have hit bottom. I'd never have been forced to look at myself and change. I shared this letter with Dr. Williams. She read it carefully, her expression neutral. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think he's doing the work," she said. "But the question isn't whether he's changed. It's whether you want to open that door again, even a crack, knowing it might hurt." "I don't know if I'm strong enough," I admitted. "Clara, you survived a 3-year legal battle, financial manipulation by your own children, and the complete reconstruction of your identity. You're strong enough for anything. The question is whether you want to." Did I want to? That was the question I couldn't answer. Part of me wanted to believe in redemption, in the possibility of rebuilding what had been destroyed. Part of me wanted to keep the door closed, to protect the peace I'd fought so hard to achieve. 6 months after the first letter, Tyler asked if we could talk on the phone. Not in person, not yet, just a phone call, if I was willing. I said yes, but I set a boundary. 30 minutes, no more. And we wouldn't discuss the past or the money. We'd talk about the present, about who we were now, not who we'd been. The call was awkward at first, both of us navigating the minefield of conversation topics that didn't touch on our shared pain. He told me about his job as a warehouse supervisor, about the small apartment he rented in a neighborhood I'd never heard of, about the community college class he was taking in music theory. I told him about the support group, about my travels, about the library at my old school. When the 30 minutes were up, I felt drained, but not damaged. It was like exercising a muscle that hadn't been used in years. Painful, but in a way that suggested healing rather than injury. "Can we do this again?" Tyler asked. "Maybe in another month?" "Maybe," I said. And I meant it. I kept that hope small and protected, not because I didn't want it to grow, but because I'd learned the hard way that hope without boundaries is just another form of enabling. Tyler would have to prove himself through years of consistent action, not months of good behavior, and I would have to protect myself by maintaining the walls I'd built, only lowering them brick by careful brick. The relationship with Tyler, if it could be called that, remained fragile and carefully bounded. We spoke once a month, always on my terms, always within strict limits. I didn't ask about Marcus or Jason, and he didn't volunteer information. That part of my life remained closed, a wound that had scarred over but would never fully heal. And I'd made peace with that. Some relationships can't be saved, shouldn't be saved. Knowing the difference is wisdom I'd paid dearly to acquire. Marcus never reached out. Neither did Jason. I heard through the grapevine that they blamed me for the family falling apart. That they told people I was cold and unforgiving. That I'd chosen money over my own children. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't try to correct the narrative. People who wanted to misunderstand would misunderstand no matter what I said. In the support group, we talked about this phenomenon, how abusers often flip the script and make themselves the victims, how they rewrite history to justify their behavior, how they recruit others to their version of events, creating an alternate reality where they're the wronged party and you're the villain. Let me share what I've learned through all of this, because if there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Financial abuse by family members is one of the most insidious forms of exploitation because it hides behind love. Your abuser doesn't look like an abuser. They look like your child, your sibling, your parent. They speak the language of family obligation and use your love as a weapon against you. The warning signs are often subtle at first. A request here and there. Stories that make you feel guilty for having resources they don't. Emergencies that only you can solve. But over time, the pattern emerges. The requests increase. The stories become less believable. The guilt becomes more intense. And you find yourself drained financially, emotionally, and spiritually, wondering how you ended up here. If you're in this situation, know this. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. Protecting yourself isn't abandonment. You can love someone and still refuse to be exploited by them. You can be a good mother, father, sister, brother, and still say no to requests that harm you. Your worth isn't measured by your willingness to be used. Document everything. Keep records of requests, loans, and promises. If something feels wrong, trust that instinct. Seek outside perspective from people who have no financial stake in the relationship. Consider consulting with a financial advisor or lawyer who specializes in elder abuse and family exploitation. You don't have to navigate this alone. Most importantly, understand that you didn't cause this. You didn't fail as a parent or family member because your loved one chose to exploit you. People make choices independent of how they were raised or how much they were loved. You can do everything right and still end up with someone who chooses wrong. That's not your burden to carry. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from? What time is it there? If you found value in my story, if it resonated with your experience or gave you insight into a situation you're facing, please leave a like. Your engagement helps other people find these stories when they need them most. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my situation? When would you have drawn the line? How do you balance love for